Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The topic of our today's discussion is data collection and ethical issues. Now, ethics, the concept of ethics, it says that all professions they are guided by code of ethics, which have evolved over the years to accommodate the changing ethos, values, needs, and expectations. And most professions they have established an overall code of ethics for conducting research in their respective fields, and they have some professions have very strict guidelines, monitor conduct effectively, and take appropriate steps against those who do not abide by the guidelines. Many research bodies have evolved a code of ethics separately for research, that is medicine, epidemiology, business, law, education, etc. Ethics are the code of conducts of the code of overall values which should be addressed while conducting any sort of research. And research ethics have got very important place. And these code of conducts which has been also been evolved over the course of time, because previously, let's say we would say that mm, copying a research uh, a personal research thesis into your own, that's a problem. You shouldn't be copying, you should be taking out the notes from some people else. But now this is the digital era. Now if you're taking the content from the web at times which might not have a proper reference as well, but you are not allowed to directly copy it in the way previously. So it has evolved. Some things which there are few things, there are few guidelines which were acceptable in the past, they are no more acceptable right now. And in this phenomena has evolved. Again, there are certain bodies which take care of these ethical code of conducts, they are being followed. And every person they perform their duty as a researcher with every morals, values, and responsibility. And all these things they are in practice to to ensure honesty in the and values, virtues in the work, and to prevent, let's say, dishonesty, honesty, fraud, plagiarism, etc. These different things from occurring in the research, because in research there this ethics, it is getting much more importance than previously. What is the concept actually? Ethical means in accordance with principles of conduct that are considered correct, especially those of a given profession or a group. That is called in the dictionary 1979 definition. Now the keywords here are principles of conduct and things which are considered correct. Now, what are these principles of conduct, and who determines them, and in whose judgment these they must be correct? These principle of conduct, they address the issue of contents of ethical practice in a profession. As the code of conduct varies from profession to profession, it is not provide it is not possible to provide a universal guidelines, universal code which can be applied to all the different fields. Therefore, so every field, every profession, they have devised their own code of conducts, and then they ensure the implementation through certain bodies as well. There are certain behaviors in research which are not considered ethical. For example, causing harm to individuals. They are in social sciences, even to their repetition maybe it may be harmed. Let's say you are taking some interviews, you are doing some observational studies, and based upon your biasness, a person, a researcher can destroy an individual's career by um, by interpreting some wrong phenomena out of those statements. At times, even observational studies, it can lead to causing harms to individual. Therefore, we need to ensure that the research is not going to do certain harms to individuals. At times, the research may involve breaching confidentiality. It's very important to keep the confidentiality of the first participants of the study uh, as much as possible, and their identities must not be disclosed. So, if someone breaches it, then it's an unethical issue. Then using information improperly, that is not for the right cause that you have originally intended to get the information, and then uh, you have utilized it improperly. A person, he might be studying, let's say, um, let's say the smoking, risk of smoking in medical practitioners or doctors, and whenever his study is completed, he has got the IDs, he has got the details of the medical doctors, practitioners into his studies, and then he sell out those information, or um, spread that information to some medicine companies or some any other person who might be properly utilizing it. That's a big problem. So the same apply. There are so many others related examples. Another important thing is, which is considered unethical, is the introducing biasness in studies. You input your own, you try to prevail your own thoughts and ideas, and you overwhelm the general perspective by your ideas. That's also considered unethical. There is a long list which is developing over the period of time. Even the ethical issues in animal work and animal research is now they are governing. They are uh, checking the the adjustments, and how do you keep the animals as well. These are experimental animals. That is also barred by a certain code of conduct. And number two question is, in whose judgment must a code of conduct be considered correct? Who is going to decide that this action is acceptable, this action is not? This percentage of action is acceptable, this percentage of action is not. What particular practice is right, what particular practice is wrong, firstly, and then if a procedure is carried out, in an inappropriate way, what penalties should be imposed and who is going to implement them? It is actually the overall body of professional or government organizations that collectively develop a professional code of conduct and forms judgments as to whether or not it's been followed. And then they can impose the penalties as well. Who are the stakeholders in research? There are many stakeholders in research, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, and each category of stakeholders in a research activity may have different interests, perspectives, purposes, aims, and motivations that could affect the way in which the research activity is carried out and the way results are communicated and are used. And it is important to look at the ethical issues in relation to each of those stakeholders of research, which includes mainly, number one, the research participants or the research subjects, the researcher himself, and the funding body. You look at into the perspective, each perspective of these stakeholders one by one. So the number one is the research participants or research subjects. Generally, all those people, all those persons who are directly or indirectly involved in a research studies are called as the research participants. Hence, they are one of the major stakeholders of a research. In addition, those who are likely to be affected by the findings of the study are also considered as the stakeholders. In the field of medicine, public health, epidemiology, nursing, patients and non-patients who become part of the study and who participate in an experiment to test the effectiveness of a drug or treatment are considered as research participants. They, again, the subjects, research subject, they might include, some animal, birds, amphibians, so many other lists. So they might be considered as the research participant. Every research participant, every subject has got its or his or her own rights, and one must always ensure that they are well adapt with their rights. They are not. There is no violation of their rights. Whether it's human rights or the animal rights, and then they should be if properly being compensated, and they should be provided with all the benefits which were ensured while the study was being initiated, while they were put into the study, and their consent was requested, consent was granted, and whatsoever you know regulation, whatsoever rules which need to be followed, they should be followed. If they were ensured, for, let's say, in human trials for vaccine development or other human trials of disease testing or therapeutic interventions, there you hire some study participants, and then you ensure that okay, your confidentiality will be ensured. You are provided with the minimum dose, which won't be which won't be giving out any um, very severe side effects. They won't be developing severe side effects. As soon as a side effect is developed, you will be compensated for your time. You will be provided with your meal and everything, and then as soon as you develop some sort of severe symptoms which are beyond the limit of the study, you will be withdrawn for the study. You might be compensated. You will be if you will be directly provided with healthcare facility. You know, so then all these things, whichsoever the person's participants' confidentiality will not be compromised. It will not be disclosed. So all these things and many more beyond that, observational study, you need to ensure the anonymity of the persons, is confidentiality. Well, simply you are taking some persons, blood for a blood grouping, let's say, for a simple task as simple as doing the blood group to has at times as a serious issue such as HIV testing, you need to ensure the confidentiality of the participants of the study. The second stakeholders in research, yes, itself, the researcher himself or herself. They constitute the second category of the stakeholder. Anyone who collects information for the specific purpose of understanding, consolidation, enhancement, and development of professional knowledge, adhering to accepted code of conduct is a researcher. So he should be understanding the code of conduct. He would be adhering to it. He might be developing his own professional knowledge, but those specific code of conducts which need to be observed, they should be observed, and he or she may represent any academic discipline, but he is one of the stakeholders in research as well. So he needs to make sure that that code of conduct, for example, the simple plagiarism, the copying of a person's, some person's work and you directly put into your research, that is not acceptable. You are even providing a small figure of some other literature, you need to provide the reference. You shouldn't you know collect data. You should not be collect data by fraud. You should not steal the data. You should always acknowledge the source. That's very important. And then at times uh, you need to keep an eye. You need to work effectively within the limits, with the code of conducts related to other stakeholders as well. The research participant, the research has to ensure that as well, and the funding body, what they are asking, what the requirements of the funding bodies is or are, and then you need to ensure them as well. The third stakeholders in research is the funding body or funding organization. They are responsible for financing a research activity, and they fall into third category of stakeholders. Most of the researches they are carried out using funding that is provided by business organization, pharmaceutical companies, service institution, government, semi-government, or voluntary research bodies, or academic institutions. And the funds are given usually for a specific purpose, specific experimentation that is uh, mutually been accepted by both of the stakeholders, the research as well as the funding body, and they definitely go into signing of these memorandum of understanding MOUs as well to ensure that none of the parties been affected and both they've given proper rights, and everything is pre-designed and accepted in advance of the or priorly before the conduction of the experimentation or experiments. It is important to ensure that research is not affected by the self-interest of any party. You know, if a funding organization is providing resources, financial resources to a researcher for a specific, let's say, set of experiments, those it is now the duty of the researcher to ensure that um, amount, that funding, that money is properly being utilized. It's not, being um, distributed. It's not being consumed in some activity which is not laid down by the original code of conduct. So that money is properly being utilized. That is one thing. Funding body, you need to ensure that their money is properly being utilized, and then whatsoever you got into the memorandum of understanding or MOUs, you have signed them. You ensure each and every point of it. You give their right. You take you and you ensure that you are provided with your rights are being researched, you are provided with your rights too. And it, your research should not be conducted in the self-interest of the researcher as well as the funding body. For example, at times the research funding body, they might be having some biasness for a research. They might be requesting, they might be asking for inclination towards certain results. Now it's about now it's the responsibility of the researcher again to ensure that such a sort of inclination, such sort of favoritism that the funding body might be asking, it should not be provided to them. That research should be free of biasness, and even the financial supporting these bodies, they should not be harming that basic instinct, basic value of the research, that it is it should not it should be carried in a way that biasness or favoritism should not be included. So the third stakeholder, the major another stakeholder is the funding body. Therefore, they have certain code of conducts, and that code of conduct should be adhered to by the funding body as well as it should be ensured by the researcher. Thank you so much for listening to the talk.